It's okay now. You've done all you could today. Oh, you tried. And that was enough. Come, child of God. This is your quiet place, a place where your burdens melt into soft stillness. A place where Jesus sits beside you, gently waiting. Let this story wrap around you like a soft blanket. Let your heart rest in the whisper of God's love. You're not alone. You are safe here, with Him. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Matthew 11:28. The old porch light flickered just once as the sun dipped beneath the line of pine trees. Eleanor noticed it from her rocking chair. She didn't get up, just kept gently swaying back and forth, as she always did at this hour. There was something sacred about the dusk, something that slowed the world down. It reminded her of the hymn she used to hum in the kitchen. Abide with me fast falls the eventide. Her house was quiet now. The kind of quiet that comes when the years stretch long and the laughter has moved out, grown up, and gotten busy. She no longer waited for the sound of a car in the driveway. No one was coming tonight. But still, she kept the porch light on. Not out of habit, but out of hope. Hope had a way of settling into her bones like a familiar shawl. She'd worn it through long winters of loneliness, through birthdays with silent phones, and quiet holidays with just one teacup on the table. She leaned her head against the back of the chair and whispered softly, "Jesus, are you near?" The breeze didn't answer, but her heart did. A slow warmth moved across her chest, not loud or dramatic, but quiet, like a knowing. She didn't need to see him to believe he was near. She didn't need a miracle, just presence. Take a deep breath, rest here for a moment. The rocking creaked gently against the old porch floor. The stars began to blink into the evening, and Eleanor closed her eyes. She wasn't going to sleep just yet, but her spirit was beginning to. She remembered when she first learned that God was not just a Sunday name, not just a voice from a pulpit. She was 17, sitting on a mossy rock by a slow stream, heart aching from something she couldn't name, and he came close. Not in words, in nearness. There was a stillness in the water, a softness in the breeze, and a whisper in her chest that said, "You are not forgotten." That whisper had followed her all her life through marriage and miscarriage, through joy and aching partings. And now, in the stillness of this porch, it returned. Tonight, Eleanor didn't want answer. She just wanted presence, and it came. She thought of the verse again, the one the pastor used to quote before the final hymn. "Hey, come to me, all you who are weary." And oh, how weary she had become. Not just in body, but in heart, tired of missing people. Tired of wondering if the best years were behind. Tired of pretending she was fine. But Jesus never asked her to pretend. He simply invited her to come, as she was, with the ache and the aging and the empty cup. And so she came, every night, in the stillness, in the quiet, to this porch, to his presence, to rest. Bedtime takeaway. You don't have to pretend with Jesus. You can come just as you are, and he will meet you in the quiet. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18. The fire had been lit an hour ago, maybe more. It crackled gently now, not too loud, not too dim, just enough to remind the old cottage that warmth was still possible. Eleanor had a chair she always used by the fire, one with a sagging cushion and a throw blanket, that had outlived 3 living rooms. She lowered herself into it with a soft sigh, curling her feet under the blanket. Her hands gently folded in her lap. She wasn't cold, not exactly, but the fire helped her feel kept, and that mattered. There was an empty chair beside hers, always had been. Some nights it felt more empty than others. She had thought once of moving it, maybe giving it away. It was, after all, just a chair, but something deep inside had told her not to. So she left it. It wasn't for a guest. It wasn't for a memory. It was for him. For Jesus. She imagined him there sometimes, not in a painting, not in a sermon, but here. Real, kind, quiet. Not preaching, just being. Tonight, she looked at the chair and whispered, "Are you here?" She didn't expect lightning or tears, and she just waited. And soon that soft warmth again. Not the kind that came from the fire, but the kind that crept into the corners of a tired soul. A warmth that said, "I see you." She exhaled slowly and leaned her head back. Some people feel God in the noise, in the songs, the crowds, the shouts of hallelujah. But Eleanor, she met him in the hush. He always came when the house was quiet, when the day was done, when there was nothing left to perform or prove. He came when she had nothing but breath, nothing but need, nothing but the simple prayer, "Be near, Lord Jesus." And he was, "Take a deep breath, rest here for a moment." The logs shifted softly in the fireplace. A single tear escaped her eye, but she didn't wipe it away. It didn't come from sadness. It came from being known. That was the hardest part of aging. Not the body's slowness, not even the loneliness, but the feeling that no one really saw you anymore. Not like before. Not like when you were needed. But Jesus, he still saw her. Not just the outer woman with soft silver hair and a quiet gait, but the girl inside, the one with the questions and hopes and thin pages of prayer. He had never looked away. There was no sermon in this moment, no miracle, no movement of the heavens. Just a woman and a fire, and an empty chair that was in some holy way not empty at all. The room grew softer, as if the night itself had bowed its head. And Eleanor closed her eyes. Bedtime takeaway. God sits with you in the quiet. You are not invisible to him. You are known and deeply loved. I wait for the Lord. My soul waits, and in his word I put my hope. Psalm 135. There was a window in Eleanor's bedroom that faced east. It was narrow and old, with a slightly crooked frame and a sill just wide enough for a teacup or a candle. The glass was a little cloudy, but she liked it that way. It softened the light, as if even the sun needed gentleness when it entered this room. Every night before bed, Eleanor stood by that window. She didn't do much, just watched. Not for anything in particular, but for the quiet coming of morning, the promise that light would return. She remembered in her younger years how fast life moved. The mornings came and went like trains she was always trying to catch. Breakfast on the go, work, family, church, always something, always noise. But now, mornings arrived slowly. They crept in like old friends who knew how to whisper. And so she began to wait for them, not anxiously, but hopefully. She found peace in the watching. The stillness taught her something the hurried years never did. God comes quietly, not always with trumpets or thunder. Sometimes he comes like dawn slow, certain and full of mercy. Tonight, the stars were beginning to scatter across the sky, one by one. Eleanor stood in her nightgown by the window, hands resting lightly on the wooden sill. She whispered, "I'll wait for you, Lord, just like always." She didn't mean just tonight. She meant her whole life. She had waited for his healing, waited through grief, waited in the shadows of uncertainty. And through it all, he had come. Not always in the way she thought, but always in the way she needed. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. There was a tree just outside her window, a young maple planted when she turned 60. She used to wonder if she'd live long enough to see it grow tall. Now, 15 years later, it reached higher than the roof. She smiled at it. "Look at you, standing tall, waiting with me." It felt like a holy companionship, her soul and that tree, both growing, slowly, both rooted, watching for light. And in the stillness, a peace settled over her. Eleanor turned from the window and made her way to the bed. The mattress dipped gently beneath her as she lay down. Before closing her eyes, she whispered a prayer not for answers, not for strength, but for presence. "Jesus, be in my dreaming. Stay close through the dark. Meet me in the morning light." The stars blinked softly beyond the glass, and the window kept its watch. Bedtime takeaway. You are not waiting alone. God meets you in the quiet hours. Even in the dark, He is already preparing the dawn. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. Psalm 119, 105. The Bible on Eleanor's nightstand was worn. Its leather cover had softened over the years, the edges frayed like the hem of a well-loved robe. Some pages stuck together from age. Others bore faint watermarks, not from spilled tea, but from tears. She didn't read it every day like she used to. Her eyes had grown slower, her attention more fragile. But she opened it often, even if just to hold it. Tonight, before turning off the lamp, she opened to one of her favorite psalms, the kind she didn't need to read with her eyes anymore. She knew it by heart, but still she wanted to see it. There it was, tucked into the middle of the book like a quiet heartbeat. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." She whispered the words aloud, not to memorize them, but to feel them. "He makes me lie down in green pastures." And she paused. Funny how that line always brought her comfort. Not asks me to lie down, not hopes I will, but makes me. As if the Lord knows we'd never rest on our own. How many years had she spent striving, trying to be enough for everyone, trying to keep the house together, the family steady, the faith strong. Even when she was young, even in the seasons of joy, she had carried so much unseen. But the shepherd had always been near, sometimes guiding, sometimes carrying, sometimes just sitting beside her when she could do nothing else but cry. She turned a few more pages. They felt like silk beneath her fingertips. There were notes in the margins, scribbled prayers, little dates, the occasional thank you or why, Lord. They weren't theology. They were testimony. Not a record of perfect faith, but a trail of quiet trust. Every verse underlined was a place she had met him. Every mark was a moment he had shown up. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. She let the Bible fall open on her lap and leaned her head back against the pillow. The lamp still glowed beside her, casting soft light across the pages. She didn't need anything else tonight, not word, not strength, not answers. Just presence and the gentle truth of Scripture that had never left her. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Your word, it still lights the path." Bedtime takeaway. You don't have to understand everything. God's word is enough to guide you through the night. Let it rest beside you like a lamp in the darkness. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. John 6:35. The kitchen was quiet now. The kettle sat unused. The dishes were all put away. And on the wooden countertop, a single cloth-covered basket rested, the one Eleanor always used for bread. She didn't bake much anymore, but the memory of it still lived in her hands. She could feel the flour on her fingers, smell the warmth of rising dough, hear the soft tap of crust being checked for doneness. Bread had always been more than food in this house. It was comfort. It was care. It was communion. When her children were young, Eleanor used to wake early before the sun, before the noise, and knead the dough in silence. She would whisper prayers as she worked, one for each child, one for her husband, one for herself, though it was always the smallest one. "Let this bread be enough today," she would whisper. "Let it hold us together." And somehow, it always did. Tonight, she didn't bake. But she lifted the cloth from the basket anyway and ran her fingers along the edge of the linen. It was the same cloth she had used for years, soft, slightly stained, and precious. She remembered the days when they would gather at the table, a simple grace, the tearing of warm bread, the laughter of children with jam on their cheeks. She had loved those days, but she didn't cling to them now. She let them rise like a scent from memory, sweet and just enough. Jesus had called himself the bread of life. Eleanor had always found that beautiful. Not the cake of life, not the treat or luxury of life, but bread. Every day, ordinary, satisfying, sacred. She had fed her family with love, with patience, with tenderness, with long hours at the table. And somehow, Jesus had fed her in return. Even now, in the quiet kitchen, he was still feeding her. Not with loaves, but with presence, with the reminder that she had enough, and that she was enough. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. She lit a small candle by the sink, not for light, but for warmth. Then she sat down at the table and placed her hands flat on the wood. There was no bread on the table tonight, but she felt full. Bedtime takeaway. Jesus is still feeding your soul gently, daily, faithfully. Even when you feel empty, his presence is enough. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. There were voices Eleanor remembered from long ago. Her mother calling from the garden. The laughter of children echoing through the hallway. Her husband humming softly while shaving before work. The neighbors' wind chimes, always clinking in odd rhythms. But now, most days were wrapped in silence. The kind of silence that stretched, that echoed. The kind that could make a person feel either holy or hollow. Eleanor sat in her chair by the window again, the same one that waited for morning. But this time, it was midnight. The moonlight spread across the floor like spilled milk. The house was still. Even the old clock on the mantel had quieted its tick. And yet, something spoke. Not in words, not even in thoughts, but in a hush that filled her chest with something she couldn't name. She didn't rush to define it. She had learned over many slow winters that God often spoke without speaking. He didn't need syllables. He didn't always explain. He just was. And in that being was love. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. There had been times when Eleanor had begged for God's voice. In grief, in confusion, in the long, lonely space after her husband passed. She would kneel on the bedroom rug and whisper, "Say something, Lord, anything." But now, with years behind her and softness within her, she knew the silence wasn't absence. It was depth. It was the holy hush of a God who didn't need to shout to be heard. She could feel him now, not in her ears, but in her bones. The way the moonlight touched her skin, the way her breathing slowed without trying, the way peace came without reason. That was his voice. She didn't need direction tonight. She didn't need answers or even hope. Just nearness. And in the silence, she heard everything she needed. Not with her hearing, but with her heart. Be still and know. She closed her eyes, not to escape, but to receive. The stillness grew thick like velvet. And God was there. Bedtime takeaway. God's voice doesn't always sound like words. Sometimes it's peace. Sometimes it's stillness, and always it is love. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1:5. There was a lamp in Eleanor's hallway. Nothing special, just a little amber glass base with a linen shade. It sat on a narrow table between two rooms, flicked on each evening and left burning through the night. It had been her habit for years, ever since her husband passed, and the dark of the house felt too heavy. It wasn't for reading. It wasn't even for walking. It was for comfort. A promise to herself that no matter how deep the night, there would always be one light left on. She walked past it now in her robe and slippers. The hallway was quiet, the floor cool underfoot. The lamp glowed softly, not bright, not boastful, just there. She paused beside it, her fingers grazing the edge of the table. "Still with me," she whispered. Not to the lamp, to him. To Jesus. The world could feel so dim some days. Not just the weather or the seasons, but the ache in the heart, the kind that crept in slowly. When phone calls stopped and letters didn't come, she never blamed anyone. She understood that life moved on. But sometimes, when she'd wake in the early hours and the silence pressed in, she'd look to that little lamp, and it would remind her, the light has not left you. It was silly, maybe, to find theology in a hallway lamp. But the longer she lived, the more she realized. God didn't always speak in church pews or grand revivals. He spoke through little things. A porch light left on, a warm cup of tea, a soft lamp in the night. They were his way of saying, I'm still here. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. Eleanor thought of the verse she'd memorized long ago. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. That had become her promise. Not that the night wouldn't come, but that the light would always remain. She sat on the edge of her bed, her body slow, her spirit tender. The glow from the hallway spilled gently through the open door, brushing the floor like moonlight. She didn't need to close the door tonight. She liked knowing the light was there, just down the hall. Even if she woke afraid, even if she cried, even if she forgot what day it was, that small lamp would still be burning. Like him, always still with her. Bedtime takeaway. God leaves the light on for you. Even in your darkest moments, His presence is near. The darkness will not overcome the light. In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit Himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. Romans 8:26. There were days Eleanor couldn't find the words. Not because she didn't have thoughts, but because the thoughts ran too deep, too tangled, too sacred to name. She would sit quietly in her armchair, hands folded gently in her lap, eyes open, staring at nothing, and let her soul speak in silence. No dear God, no amen, just stillness and presence. She used to think prayers had to be structured like the ones at church, with reverent voices and careful phrasing. She had tried to copy them once, but somewhere along the way, maybe after the grief, maybe after the loneliness, she discovered something deeper. The truest prayers don't always sound like prayers. Sometimes they're sighs. Sometimes they're just sitting in the presence of God without needing to say anything at all. One evening, she had tried to pray for her children. She wanted to ask for their peace, their safety, their return to faith. But no words came, just a tightness in her chest, just the sound of her own breathing. And somehow she knew that was enough. The Spirit understood. The Spirit translated. God was not confused by silence. Tonight, she sat by the fire again, no Bible on her lap, no song on her lips. Just herself, tired, still, held. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. She closed her eyes and whispered, "If I don't know what to say, will you still be near?" And the answer came, not as a sentence, but as warmth. A weightless hush that wrapped around her shoulders, like an invisible blanket, like love that didn't need to be explained. She stayed like that for a while, no thoughts, no script, just her heart resting in the nearness of God. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out once and then was still. The world paused, and she knew her prayer had been heard, even though it had never been spoken. Bedtime takeaway. You don't need perfect words to reach God. He understands your silence. Your very breath is a prayer, and He listens. He will cover you with His feathers, and under His wings you will find refuge. Psalm 91:4. Eleanor's hands moved slowly, gently, as she folded the quilt at the foot of her bed. It was second nature by now. Every morning she folded it neatly. Every night she unfolded it again. There was something deeply tender in that simple act, not rushed, not routine, but almost sacred. The quilt was old, a patchwork of faded colors and hand-stitched prayers. Her grandmother had sewn it decades ago, back when Eleanor was a child small enough to be tucked in under it. It still smelled faintly of lavender. Each square of the quilt told a story. This one, blue with little stars, had come from an old dress. That one, pale yellow, was from her sister's apron. The pink floral corner, her mother's church handkerchief. A whole life had been sewn together, piece by piece, and wrapped around her every night like memory. But more than memory was what felt like covering, like care. And tonight, as Eleanor smoothed it across her lap, she thought of God's covering. She didn't always feel brave, didn't always feel faithful. Some days, she simply felt tired. Tired of trying, tired of hoping, tired of saying I'm fine. But as she tucked the quilt around her legs and leaned back into the pillow, a new whisper entered her heart. You are allowed to be tired. God was not asking her to carry more. He wasn't waiting for strength. He was offering wings. Refuge. A place to be small, to be seen, to be loved without having to do anything at all. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. She thought of birds, how they nest beneath branches, how they flutter into quiet safety at the end of the day. She had watched them many evenings from her porch, tiny lives held beneath shelter, tiny hearts, safe. And now, she was one of them, wrapped not just in cloth, but in the soft embrace of her father's care. She whispered, "Cover me, Lord, like you always have." And she felt it, not feather, not fabric, but peace. The deep kind that doesn't ask question, the kind that simply rests. Bedtime takeaway. God covers you gently, patiently, daily. Even when you're weary, He tucks you in with mercy. You are safe under His wings. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run to it and are safe. Proverbs 18:10. It was a small whisper at first. Just a single name spoken in the stillness, Jesus. Eleanor said it aloud, barely more than a breath. Not because she needed anything, not because she was afraid, just because His name was beautiful, soft, safe, familiar, like the scent of old pages or the hush of snowfall at midnight. She had said His name in 1,000 seasons. When she was a child, kneeling at her bedside, Jesus, bless Mama and Papa. When she was a bride, full of hope, Jesus, help me love well. When she lost a baby, when the doctor said the word cancer, when her husband passed quietly in his sleep, each time it was His name that steadied her, not as magic, but as a presence, a place to run when there was nowhere else to go. Tonight she didn't pray a list. She just said His name, over and over, slowly, like a lullaby for her soul. Jesus. Each syllable wrapped around her heart like balm, not demanding anything, just letting Him be who He is. Not a distant God, but a near friend. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. She thought of how the Bible describes His name, a strong tower, a refuge, a hiding place. She didn't need walls of stone tonight, just the gentle safety of speaking His name and knowing He hears. Even now, even in this quiet room, even in this aging body, His name still opens the door to peace. She placed her hand over her chest, feeling the rise and fall of her breath. Jesus, she whispered once more, not to summon Him, but to rest in Him. And as she let the silence return, she felt it, a warmth, a nearness, a love that had never left her side. Bedtime takeaway. There is peace in His name. You don't need perfect prayers. Just whisper Jesus, and He will meet you there. You will go out in joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and hills will burst into song before you, and all the trees of the field will clap their hands. Isaiah 55:12. The garden had long since stopped blooming. The roses were now more stem than flower. The lavender had turned gray at the edges. The little bench beneath the elm tree wore a shawl of fallen leaves. But Eleanor still walked there. Not every day, not in the rain, but when the wind was kind and her knees felt steady. She would make her way through the back gate and into that small patch of earth she had tended for decades. It didn't need to bloom for her to find peace there. The peace wasn't in the flowers. It was in the stillness between them. She had planted the garden after her second miscarriage. There were no words that could comfort her back then, no sermon that could explain the ache. But the dirt didn't ask questions. It just received, and somehow, planting became her way of praying. Every seed, a surrender, every bloom, a quiet hallelujah. Even now, as the garden slept through autumn's hush, Eleanor felt that same nearness. She sat down on the old bench and looked at the bare branches. She didn't feel sadness. She felt something gentler, acceptance, maybe a soft kind of trust. Because even without blossoms, the garden was not empty. It was resting. And resting was not the same as dying. Resting meant there was still life beneath the surface, waiting. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. She looked at the small patch where daisies used to grow. She'd planted them with her granddaughter one spring, a joyful, Messy day of laughter and dirty hands. The daisies were gone now, but the memory lingered. Not loud, just enough. Everything beautiful in its time, she whispered. She hadn't always believed that verse. But time and loss and grace had softened her heart. Now she knew even what seems buried isn't gone. It's just waiting for the right season. She closed her eyes there on the bench, the garden quiet around her, her soul quiet within her. She didn't need everything to bloom. She only needed to know that peace could live, even in stillness, even in the waiting. And it did. Bedtime takeaway. Even when life feels bare, peace is still possible. God is still present in the resting, in the waiting, in the quiet garden of your heart. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. Ecclesiastes 3:1. The old clock in Eleanor's living room ticked, but never hurried. It had sat on the mantel since the year she and her husband moved into the house, a gift from her father, made of dark cherry wood, with delicate gold hands and a face that had faded softly with time. It wasn't loud, just a steady, humble rhythm, tick, tick, tick. Not a command, not a push, but a reminder. Time was moving, so but gently. In her younger years, Eleanor had been rushed by time, always running to work, to church, to the store, to the next season of life. She had once believed that being busy meant being faithful. That motion was proof of purpose. But now, in these slower years, she had begun to see something holier in stillness. The clock hadn't changed. She had. It still marked the minutes, but she no longer obeyed them like a slave. She listened to them like a hymn. She often sat in her chair across from the mantel and watched it. Not because she was waiting for something, but because it helped her stop waiting. It told her without saying a word. There is time for everything, and you don't need to rush. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. Some days, Eleanor didn't finish her to-do list. The laundry waited. The dishes sat. The letters weren't written. And once, she would have felt guilt. But not anymore. Now she knew that the most important things couldn't be scheduled. Peace wasn't on a checklist. Neither was presence, or prayer, or simply being kind to herself. God wasn't measuring her days and tasks. He was meeting her in them, minute by minute, heartbeat by heartbeat. As the afternoon light shifted across the floor, Eleanor let her head rest back on the chair. The clock ticked on, unhurried, unbothered, faithful. And in its rhythm, she heard grace. Bedtime takeaway. You don't have to race through life. God is not in a hurry with you. There is time for rest, and He will meet you in it. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. Psalm 139:4. It was tucked in the back of the drawer, a single envelope, slightly yellowed at the edges. Unsealed, unsent. Eleanor had written it years ago. She had forgotten about it for a while until this morning, when looking for an old photograph. Her fingers brushed against the smooth paper, and she remembered. She didn't open it right away, just held it. It was strange how something so small could hold so much feeling. The letter wasn't long, it wasn't poetic, just honest. She had written it to her daughter during one of those tender years when words had been scarce. Between them and phone calls ended too soon. It had been a season of silence, not anger, just distance. So one evening, Eleanor had sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand, and poured out the truth her voice couldn't say. I miss you. I don't know what to say anymore. I love you, even in the quiet. But the letter had never been sent. She wasn't sure why. Maybe pride, maybe fear. Maybe the simple ache of not knowing what kind of reply or silence might come. And yet, as she sat now, years later, holding the letter in her hands, she realized something. It had been read not by her daughter, but by God. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. She thought of all the words she had held inside over the years, the ones she didn't know how to say, the ones she had whispered into her pillow, the ones she had written but never mailed. And she knew, somehow, none of them had been lost. God had seen them. He had heard them. Even the unsent letter guru was a prayer. And sometimes, that was enough. Eleanor didn't feel the need to send the letter anymore. Time had softened the silence between her and her daughter. There had been hugs since then. Small kindnesses, a shared cup of coffee on the porch last spring. But she was glad the letter still existed. It reminded her that no honest word spoken or not ever disappears in God's hands. She tucked it gently back into the drawer, not hidden, just resting. And as she closed it, she whispered, "Thank you for reading what I couldn't say." Bedtime takeaway. Even your unsaid words are seen by God. He understands the letters you never send, the feelings you cannot name, the prayers too deep for language. He hears them all. Whether you turn to the right or to the left, your ears will hear a voice behind you saying, "This is the way, walk in it." Isaiah 30:21. The steps down to the garden had creaked for years. 4 wooden boards, weathered, familiar, forgiving beneath her weight. Eleanor knew exactly where each one squeaked. She didn't have to think about her footing anymore. Her feet remembered. Even when her mind forgot small things like where she left her reading glasses or what day it was, her feet still knew the way. Down the step, past the elm tree, to the bench near the sleeping roses. That morning she had walked the path slowly, holding onto the railing, wrapped in her cardigan, breathing in the cool scent of damp soil and pine. It wasn't much, just a short walk, but it felt like something sacred. A quiet pilgrimage, not to accomplish anything, but simply to arrive. She had lived in this house so long, the pathways had become like gentle maps in her soul. Each creaking stair, each bend in the path, each worn stone in the garden walk. They were part of her, like prayers she didn't have to say anymore, only walk. And in that small motion, she found something holy. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. There was a time when she thought following God meant always knowing the next step, having a plan, a vision, an answer. But now she knew better. Sometimes faith was simply putting one foot in front of the other, even when nothing felt certain except the quiet whisper inside. "Keep going, I'm with you." That's what the creaking steps reminded her of. Not certainty, but nearness. She sat on the bench again, letting the sun warm her hands. And she smiled, not because everything made sense, but because she had walked, and he had walked with her. Even when her steps were slow, even when they faltered, the path was never empty. Bedtime takeaway. Even when life feels uncertain, God is gently guiding your every step. You don't have to know the whole path. Just walk with him. Let my teaching fall like rain and my words descend like dew, like showers on new grass, like abundant rain on tender plants. Deuteronomy 32:2. The rain began without warning. Not a storm, not a downpour. Just a soft, steady fall, the kind that whispered rather than shouted. The kind that made the world feel slower, safer. Eleanor didn't move. She was still sitting on the bench in her garden, her cardigan buttoned at the top, hands folded quietly in her lap. She felt the first cool drop on her wrist, then another, then many. But still, she didn't rise. There had been a time when rain meant running, closing window, gathering laundry from the line, rushing children inside with muddy shoes and squeals of protest. Back then, rain interrupted. Now, it invited. She lifted her face toward the sky, eyes closed, cheeks kissed by the gentle fall. She wasn't cold. She wasn't afraid of catching something. She was present. The rain didn't scold or press. It just came softly, like a song with no words. And she let it. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. She thought of how often life had demanded movement, fix this, solve that, respond quickly. Keep going. But not here, not now, not with this rain. God had always known how to speak through water. In the flood, in the river Jordan, in the well beside the woman who was thirsty in more ways than one. And now, in her garden, on her skin, he was speaking again. No sermon, no commands, just presence. She whispered into the rain, let it fall. Lord, I'm not going anywhere. And it did. For minutes, maybe longer, it drizzled gently around her. Not soaking her, just covering her, like a baptism of rest. When she finally stood, her back straightened slowly, her breath deepened, and she felt more alive than she had in days. Not because anything had changed, but because she had stopped and let God be near. Bedtime takeaway. You don't need to rush through your rain. God is in the soft places, even in the drizzle. Let him fall gently over your soul. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. Isaiah 42:3. The candle on her nightstand had burned low. It wasn't a new candle, its label had peeled, and the wax inside had sunk into uneven grooves. It leaned ever so slightly in its jar, but its flame still danced. A little, softly. Eleanor watched it as she lay beneath the quilt, her hands resting gently on her stomach, her breathing slow. The room was mostly dark now, except for that one small flicker of light beside her. It didn't glow brightly. It didn't command attention. But it had not gone out. She smiled to herself. That candle felt familiar. It reminded her of her own soul, not loud anymore, not burning with youthful passion, but steady. Flickering maybe, but still lit. There had been days, many of them, when she wondered if her light was fading. Days when prayer felt thin, when the world felt too heavy, when hope was quiet and far away. She had questioned herself. Was she doing enough? Was her faith strong enough? But then, this verse returned to her heart like a slow tide. A bruised reed he will not break. A smoldering wick he will not snuff out. God was not disappointed in her flickering. He treasured it. Take a deep breath, rest here for a moment. Sometimes, she thought the church forgot about those with quiet faith, the ones who didn't shout amen, the ones who didn't always feel joy, the ones who simply held on by a thread. But God never forgot. He saw the single candle, the tiny flame, the breath of a prayer whispered into the dark. And he came near, not to blow it out, but to guard it, to breathe life back into it. Eleanor turned slightly in her bed, pulling the quilt closer to her chin. The candle flickered once, then steadied. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you for staying with me, even when I flicker." And in the hush that followed, she felt a warmth deeper than the flame. Not from wax or wick, but from love. From the one who never left. Bedtime takeaway. Even when your faith flickers, God does not turn away. He cherishes the light you carry, no matter how small. I will not forget you. See, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. Isaiah 49:15-16. It was the smallest room in the house. Once a sewing room, later a guest room. Now, a space mostly forgotten by others, but not by Eleanor. She still visited it from time to time, not to clean, not to fix, but to remember. The walls still held faint imprints of old photographs. The window, half covered in lace, filtered the light in that quiet, golden way that only memory understands. The room had grown still, but not empty. It remembered her. There was an old rocking chair in the corner. She had nursed her son in that chair once, long ago, his head soft as peaches, his cries soothed by gentle rhythms and worn hymns. She had prayed in that chair too, some of her most desperate prayers, spoken with wet cheeks and tired hands. And now, as she lowered herself into it, the wood creaked not rudely but kindly, as if the room recognized her. She looked around and smiled softly. There, on the shelf, was the jar of buttons she never sorted. There, in the drawer, the tiny sock she never threw away. There, in the dust, a trail of a life faithfully lived. So much had changed, so many seasons come and gone. But this room hadn't forgotten her hands, her tears, her laughter. And neither had God. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. She thought about what it meant to be remembered. Not just by people who forget, who move on, who mean well but often miss the small details, but by God. I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. She didn't have to fight to be seen. She didn't have to strive to matter. She already did. She always had. Every quiet offering, every unseen kindness, every long night spent waiting or weeping, all of it was remembered, held, treasured. She placed her hand on the arm of the chair and whispered, "You still see me, don't you?" And in that silent space, something within her settled. She didn't need an answer. The presence was enough. Bedtime takeaway. You are not forgotten. Even when the world grows quiet, God remembers your name, your story, your soul. He always has. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Psalm 19:1. The sky had always been her favorite ceiling. Eleanor had loved it since she was a child, lying on her back in summer grass, watching clouds drift like slow conversations between angels. Even now, at 83, her neck stiff and her knees creaking, and she still looked up. She didn't need a telescope, just a window, just a moment. And there, beyond rooftops and branches, was the sky, always waiting, always wide, always whispering something holy. That evening, she opened the curtains in her bedroom. The last light of day had dipped beneath the hills, and the first stars blinked gently into being. She didn't rush to name constellations. She had long stopped needing to know what everything was called. It was enough just to behold. There had been seasons when she felt small beneath that sky. Times when prayers went unanswered, when grief made the heavens feel distant, silent, vast. But with age had come a quiet knowing that big didn't mean far, and silence didn't mean absence. The sky didn't need to speak, it only needed to be. And in its stillness, God was present. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. She remembered once years ago, standing barefoot in the backyard at 2 a.m., wrapped in a shawl, tears on her cheeks, looking up into a sky she couldn't see clearly. But knowing he was there. The same stars that saw Abraham, the same moon that lit the path for Mary and Joseph, the same dark canvas stretched over Gethsemane. It was the same sky now, and it was still proclaiming glory, still speaking without words. Eleanor pressed her fingers to the glass. Cold met skin, and then warmth deep within. She whispered, "I see you." Not because she could make out his face in the stars, but because she saw his gentleness, his artistry, his faithful vastness. The sky wasn't empty, Sword, it was full. With him, bedtime takeaway. Look up, even in the dark, God's presence is vast and tender. The sky waits for your eyes because he never stops watching over you. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Lamentations 3:22-23. The first light crept in through the lace curtain, not harsh, not bright, but soft, like a whisper. Eleanor stirred beneath the quilt, not with urgency, not with alarm, but with a quiet awareness. She had made it to morning, and that in itself felt holy. The world outside was just waking. Birdsong floated through the window, still sleepy, still searching. The kettle in the kitchen had not yet been filled. The floorboards had not yet creaked beneath her slippers. The clock had not yet spoken its first chime. But even before all that, there was this whisper, a knowing, a nearness, a small warmth in her chest that said, "You are loved, and the day is already held." She didn't try to rush into it. There was no hurry now. She had nothing to prove, no meetings to attend, no hands to pack lunches or fold laundry or answer phones. Just breath, just presence, just God already here. Take a deep breath, rest here for a moment. She remembered mornings when life felt different. The clatter of cereal bowls, the hum of the washing machine, the search for missing shoes, misplaced homework, the frantic scrawling of notes on napkins. She had met God then too, in the chaos, in the crumbs, in the small moments of surrender. But now she met him in silence, and still he came. She sat up slowly, feet to the rug, and whispered what had become her morning prayer, nothing elaborate. Just this. Thank you for letting me wake up with you. And in that moment, she felt no ache for yesterday, no fear for tomorrow. Only peace, only presence. The kind that doesn't come from understanding, but from being held. Bedtime takeaway. Each new morning is a gentle mercy. You don't have to face it alone. God meets you in the stillness before the first word is spoken. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Psalm 23:6. The day had passed slowly, like a leaf drifting down a quiet stream. Eleanor had sat in the sun, watered her violets, read the same paragraph of her favorite book 3 times. She had listened to a hymn or two, stood by the window as the clouds changed shape, and let herself feel the gift of being, without needing to do. Now, the light was soft again, the shadows long and golden. The end of the day had come, and with it, peace. She sat once more in her chair, the one beside the window. The quilt lay across her lap. The candle on the nightstand flickered gently, and the air held that sacred hush that only comes when everything is finally still. She knew this moment well. Not just the end of the day, but the slow, holy winding down of a life well lived. She didn't fear it. Not anymore. She had once when she was younger, when she worried about what it would feel like to say goodbye to this world, when she wondered if she had done enough. But Grace had taught her something deeper, that the end was not the end. It was the doorway to love, and that love was already here. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. Eleanor looked around the room one last time that evening. The porch light still shone outside. The hallway lamp glowed softly. Her Bible, still open to Psalm 23, lay beside her. And in the quiet, she whispered, "You've walked with me this whole way, haven't you?" And in the deepest place in her soul, she felt the answer. Yes, every step, every breath, every tear. She smiled not wide, but deep. The kind of smile born from knowing she had been loved all her life. Not for her usefulness, not for her perfectionness, but for her being. As her eyes grew heavy, she whispered one final prayer. "Lord, when I finally step through, let it feel just like this. Quiet, safe, wrapped in you." And in that stillness she rested, not just for the night, but in the truth that had carried her from youth to old age. That love had followed her and would receive her. When all else faded, it would still remain, and it would be enough. At every end, God's love is already waiting. You are never alone in the quiet. He walks you all the way home and welcomes you with arms still open. Shh, you've reached the end, dear heart. The story has quieted now, but his presence has not. Let your shoulders sink. Let your thoughts grow still. Let your soul lean into the one who has never left your side. You are not forgotten. You are not too late. You are not too much or not enough. You are his. So rest now under the watchful love of your Savior. Tomorrow will come. But for now, just sleep. He is here,